New 72 Radio, the voice, views, and visions of the collective.
Hello, welcome to another edition of The Voice of Odin. This one is pre-recorded because the time you're going to be listening to it will be a very busy time. But if you have any questions, please email me about the things I've read and the things we've discussed today. So sit back and just listen to the reading of the stores. This is a book that's called Norse Mythology, and we're going to talk about the worship of Thor back in the day. Thor's name has been given to many places. He was wont of frequents, such as principal harbours of the Faroe Islands, and to families which claimed to be descended from him. It is still extant in such names as Thunder Hill in Surrey, and in family names of Thoburn and Thorwalden, but is most conspicuous in the name of one of the days of the week, Thor's Day, or as we call it, Thursday. Over the whole earth, still it is Thor's Day. Thor was considered a preeminently benevolent deity, and it was for that reason that he was so widely worshipped, and that temples to his worship arose at Moye, Halda, Godny, Gothenland, Uppsala, and other places, where the people never failed to invoke him, or to favourable year as Yuletide, his principal festival. It was customary on this occasion to burn a great log of oak, his sacred tree, as an emblem of the warmth and light of summer, which would drive away the darkness of the cold winter nights. Brides invariably wore red, Thor's favourite colour, which was considered emblematic of love, and for the same reason betrothal rings in the north were almost always set with a red stone. Thor's temples and statues, like Odin's, were fashioned of wood, and a greater number of them were destroyed during the reign of King Olav the Saint. According to ancient chronicles, this monarch forcibly converted his subjects. He was especially incensed against the inhabitants of a certain province because they worshipped the rude image of Thor, which they decked with golden ornaments and before which they set food every evening, declaring the god ate it, as no trace of it was left in the morning. The people, being called upon in 1030 to renounce this idol in favour of the true God, promised to consent if the morrow were cloudy. But when after a whole night spent by Olaf in the ardent of prayer, there followed a cloudy day, the obstinate people declared that they were not yet convinced of his God's power, and would only believe it if the sun shone on the next day. Once more Olaf spent the night in prayer, but at dawn, to his great chagrin, the sky was overcast. Nevertheless, he assembled the people near Thor's statue, and after secretly bidding his principal attendant to smash the idol with a battle axe if the people turned their eyes away for a moment, he began to address them. Suddenly, while all were listening to him, Olav pointed to the horizon, where the sun was slowly breaking its way through the clouds, and exclaimed, "Behold, our God!" The people, one and all, turned to see what he meant, and the attendants seized this opportunity for attacking the idol, which yielded easily to his blows, and the host of mice and other vermin scattered hastily from its hollow interior. Seeing now that the food placed before their god had been devoured by noxious animals, the people ceased to revere Thor, and definitely accepted the faith which King Olav had so long and vainly impressed upon them. And now we're going to talk about Tyr, the god of war. Tyr, Zu, or Tyrwaz, as I call him, which is also the name of one of the older Futhark runes, was the son of Odin. And according to different mythologists, his mother was Frigga, queen of the gods, or a beautiful giantess whose name is unknown, but who was a personification of the raging sea. He is the god of martial honour and one of the 12 principal deities of Asgard. Although he appears to have no special dwelling there, he was always welcome in Vlungolf, or Valhalla, and occupied one of the 12 thrones in the great council hall of Gladheim. The hall's Gladheim, which is built of gold, where all in circle ranged 12 golden chairs, and its the midst one higher was Odin's throne. It's a poem by Matthew Arnold. As the god of courage and war, Tyr was frequently invoked in the various nations of the north, who cried to him, as well as to Odin, to obtain victory. That he ranked next to Odin and Thor is proved by his name, Tyr having been given to one of the days of the week, Tyr's Day, which in modern English has become Tuesday. Under the name of Zu, Tyr was the principal divinity of the Siberians, who originally called their capital, the modern Augsburg, Zudsburg. This people, venerating the god as they did, were wont to worship him under the emblem of a sword, his distinctive attribute, and in his honour held great sword dances, where various figures were performed. Sometimes the participants, forming two long lines, cross their swords, point upwards, and challenge the boldest among their number to take a flying leap over them. At other times, the warriors joined their sword points closely together in the shape of a rose or a wheel, and when this figure was complete, invited their chief to stand at the very navel thus formed, shining blades, and when they bore him up upon it, the camp, they would walk in triumph. The sword point was further considered so sacred that it became customary to register oaths upon it. Come hither, gentlemen, and lay your hands against my sword. Never to speak of this, what you have heard. Swear it now by the sword. That's from Shakespeare. A distinctive feature of the worship of the god among the Franks and some northern nations was that the priests called Druids or Gothai offered up human sacrifices upon his altars, generally cutting and blooding or spread eagle upon their victims. That is to say, making a deep incision in the side of their backbone, turning their ribs loosened inside out, and tearing out their viscera, although the opening thus made. Of course, only prisoners of war were treated thus, and it was considered a point of honour with Northern European races to endure this torture without moan. These sacrifices were made upon rude stone altars called dolmens, which can still be seen in Northern Europe. This was called the blood eagle. As Tyr was considered the patron god of the sword, it was deemed indispensable to engrave this sign or rune representing him upon the blade of every sword, an observance which the Edda enjoined upon those who were desirous of obtaining victory. Sigrunes thou must know, if victory, Sigir, thou wilt have, and on thy sword's hilt wrist them, some of chappies, some on the guard, and twice name the name of Tyr. That's from the Lay of Sigdrifter. Tyr was identical with the Saxon god Sasnot, from Sas, or sword, and Ir, Hiru, and Chiru, the chief divinity of the Cheruski, were also considered him god of the sun, and deemed his shining sword blade an emblem of its rays. This very sword, a ray of light, snatched from the sun. That's a poem by J.C. Jones, talking about Valhalla. Now, Tyr's sword, according to an ancient legend, Shiru's sword, which I have been fashioned by some dwarves, the sons of Ivaldi, who had also made Odin's spear, were held very sacred by his people, to whose care he had entrusted it, declaring that those who possessed it were sure to have victory over their foes. But although carefully guarded in the temple, where it hung so that it reflected its first beams in the morning sun, it suddenly and mysteriously disappeared one night. Avala, a druidess or prophetess consulted by the priests, revealed that the Norns had decreed that whoever wielded it would conquer the world and come to his death by it. But in spite of all the entreaties, she refused to tell who had taken it or where it might be found. Sometime after this occurrence, a tall and dignified stranger came to Cologne, where Vertilius, the Roman prefect, was feasting, and called him away from his beloved deities. In the presence of the Roman soldiery, he gave him the sword, telling him it would bring the glory and renown, and finally hailed him as emperor. The cry was taken up by the assembled legions, and Vitellius, without making any personal effort to secure the honour, found himself elected Emperor of Rome. The new ruler, however, was so absorbed in indulging his taste for food and drink that he paid little heed to this divine weapon. One day, whilst leisurely making his way towards Rome, he carefully let it hanging in the antechamber of the pavilion. A German soldier seized this opportunity to substitute in its stead his own rusty blade, and the besotted emperor did not notice the exchange. When he arrived at Rome, he learned that the Eastern legions had named Vespasian emperor, and that he was even then on his way home to claim the throne. Searching for his sacred weapon to defend his rights, Vitellius now discovered the theft, and overcome by superstitious fears, did not even attempt to fight. He crawled away into a dark corner of his palace, whence he was ignominiously dragged by the enraged populace to the foot of the Capitoline Hill. There the prophecy was duly fulfilled, for the Roman soldier who had joined the opposite faction, coming along at that moment, cut off Vitellius's head, and the sacred sword had proved his prophecy true. The German soldier now changed from one legion to another and travelled over the lands, but wherever he and his sword were found, victory was assured. After winning great honour and distinction, this man, having grown old, retired from active service to the banks of the Danube, where he secretly buried the treasured weapon, building his hut over the resting place to guard it for as long as he might live. When he lay on his deathbed, he was implored to reveal where he had hidden it, but he persistently refused to do so, saying it would be found by the man who was destined to conquer the world, but that he would not be able to escape the curse. Years passed by, wave after wave, the tide of barbarian invasion swept over the part of the country, and at last there came a terrible Huns under the leadership of Attila, the scourge of God. As he passed along the river, he saw a peasant mournfully examining its cow's foot, which had been wounded by a sharp instrument hidden in the long grass. And when search was made, the point of the buried sword was found sticking out of the soil. Attila, seeing the beautiful workmanship and the fine state of preservation of the weapon, immediately exclaimed that it was Chiru's sword, and brandishing it above his head, he announced that he would be conqueror of the world. Battle after battle was fought by the Huns, who, according to the saga, were everywhere victorious until Attila, weary of warfare, settled down in Hungary, taking to wife the beautiful Burgundian princess Ildiko, whose father he had slain. This princess, resenting the murder of her kin and wishing to avenge it, took advantage of the king's state of intoxication upon the wedding night to secure possession of the divine sword, with which she slew him in the bed, once more fulfilling the prophecy uttered so many years before. The magic sword again disappeared for a long time, to be unearthed once more for the last time by the Duke of Alva, Charles V's general, who shortly after won the victory of Mulberg. The Franks were wont to celebrate yearly martial games in honour of the sword, but it was said that the heathen gods were renounced in favour of Christianity. The priests transferred many of their attributes to the saints, and that this sword became the property of the Archangel Michael, who has wielded it ever since. Tyr, whose name was synonymous with bravery and wisdom, was also considered by the ancient Norse people to have the white-armed Valkyries, Odin's attendants at his command, and they thought that it was designated the warriors whom they should transfer to Valhalla to aid the gods on the last day. The god sent Tyr, Gondul and Skogul to choose a king of the race of Yngvi to dwell with Odin in roomy Valhalla. That's from Norse mythology, R.B. Anderson. And then, speaking of Tyr, then we move on to Fenris. Tyr was generally spoken of and represented as the one-armed, just as Odin was called the one-eyed. Various explanations are offered by different authorities. Some claim that it was because he could give the victory only on one side, others because the sword had been his blade. However, this must be the ancients preferred an account for the fact of the following way, and this is the story they're told. Why Tyr was to have one arm. Loki married secretly at Jotunheim the hideous giantess Agraboda, which actually means anguish aboding, who bore him 3 monstrous children, the wolf Fenris, Hel, and the part partly coloured goddess of death, and Jormungand, the terrible Midgard serpent. He kept the existence of these three monsters secret as long as he could, but they were speedily grew so large that they could no longer remain confined in the cave where they had come to light. Odin, from his throne, Hilskaf, soon became aware of their existence and also of the disquieting rapidity from which they increased in size. Fearful lest the monsters, when they would gain further strength, should invade Asgard and destroy the gods, the All-Father was determined to get rid of them, and striding off to Jotunheim, he flung Hel into the depths of Niflheim, telling her she could reign over the 9 dismal worlds of the dead. He then cast Jormungand into the sea, where it attained such immense proportions that all at last he encircled the earth and could bite his own tail. Into mid-ocean's dark depths hurled, grown with each day to giant size, the serpent stood enclosed the world, with tail in mouth a circle wise, held harmless still by Odin's will. It's a poem, Valhalla, by Jason Jones. None too well pleased with the serpent should attain such fearful dimensions as his new element, Odin resolved to lead Fenris to Asgard, where he hoped by kindly treatment to make him gentle and tactile. But the gods, one and all, shrank in dismay when they saw the wolf, and none dared approach to give his food except Tyr, whom nothing daunted. Seeing that Fenris daily increased in size, strength, and voracity and fierceness, the gods assembled in council to deliberate how they might best dispose of him. They unanimously decided that they would desecrate their peace steads to slay him. They would bind him so fast that he could work no harm. With that purpose in view, they obtained a strong chain named Leodin, and then playfully proposed to Fenris to bind this about him as a test of his vaulted strength. Confident in the ability to release himself, Fenris patiently allowed them to bind him fast. And when all stood aside, there was a mighty effort. He stretched himself and easily burst the chains asunder. Concealing their chagrin, the gods were loud in praise of this strength. But they next produced a much stronger fetter, Droma, which, after some persuasion, the wolf allowed them to fasten around him as before. Again, a short, sharp struggle sufficed to burst this bond, and in its proverbial north to use the figuration expression to get loose of a lading and to dash out of Droma whenever great difficulties are to be surmounted. Twice did the Aesir strive to bind, twice did the fetters powerless find, iron or brass to no avail, nought save magic could prevail. The gods, perceiving now that the ordinary bonds, however strong, would never prevail against the Fenris wolf, great strength, bade Skirnir, Frey's servant, to go down to Svartalfheim and bid the dwarves fashion a bond with nothing could sever. By magic arts, the dark elves manufactured a slender silken rope from such impalpable materials as the sound of a cat's footsteps, a woman's beard, the roots of a mountain, the longings of a bear, and the voice of the fishes, and the spittle of the birds. And when it was finished, they gave it to Skirnir, assuring him that no strength would avail to break it, and that the more it was strained, the stronger it would become. Gleipnir at last by dark elves cast, in Svartalfheim with strong spells wrought, to Odin by Skirnir brought, as soft as silk, as light as air, yet still of magic power most rare. Armed with this bond called Gleipnir, the gods went with Fenris to the island of Lindvi, in the middle of the lake Amsvartnir, and again proposed to test his strength, but old Fenris had grown still stronger. He mistrusted the bond that would look so light. He thereof refused to allow himself to be bound, unless one of the Aesir would consent to put his hand in the mouth and leave it there as a pledge of good faith, that no magic arts would be used against him. The gods heard the decision with dismay, and all drew back except Tyr, who, seeing that the others would not venture to comply with this condition, boldly stepped forward and thrust his hand between the monster's jaws. The gods now fastened Gleipnir securely around Fenris' neck and paws, and when they saw that his utmost efforts to free himself were fruitless, They shouted and laughed with glee. Tyr, however, could not share their joy, for the wolf, finding himself captive, bit off the god's hand at the wrist, which since then has been known as the wolf's joint. This is a poem by Loki. Be silent, Tyr. Thou could never settle a strife twixt two. Of thy right hand also I must mention make, which Fenris took. Tyr. I am a hand and wanting, but thou of honest fame. Sad is the lack of either, nor is the wolf at ease. He in bonds must abide until the gods' destruction. That's from Sedmund's Edda. Deprived of his right hand, Tyr was now forced to use his maimed arm for his shield and to wield his sword with his left hand. But such was the dexterity that he slew his enemies as before. The gods, in spite of the wolf's struggles, drew the end of the fetter Gelgir through the rock Gio and fastened it to a boulder Thridi, which was sunk deep into the ground. Opening wide the fearful jaws, Fenris uttered such terrible howls that the gods, to silence him, thrust a sword into his mouth, with hilt resting upon the lower jaw and the point against his palate. The blood then began to pour out in such streams that it formed a great river called Von. The wolf was destined to remain thus chained fast until the last day, when he would burst his bonds and would be free to avenge his wrongs. The wolf Fenrir, freed from the chain, shall range the earth. That's from the Death Song of Hakan. While some mythologies see this in myth as emblem of crime restrained and made innocuous by the power of law, others see the underground fire which kept within bonds can endure no one, but which unfettered fills the world with destruction and woe, just as Odin's second eye is said to rest in Mimir's well. So Tyr's second hand sword is found in Fenrir's jaws. He has no more use for two weapons than the sky for two suns. The worship of Tyr is commented and commemorated in sundry places such as Tierbergen in Germany, which bear more or less modified forms of his name. The name has also been given to the aconite, a plant known in Northern Europe as Tyr's helm. So that's my first voice of Odin for a while, just giving you a few, it's somebody else's point of view on the different gods and how they came about and how they were worshipped and what they were worshipped for. I'm glad you enjoyed listening, and I'll speak to you all soon on the Voice of Odin.